Every day I wake up and think, this 2025 Orioles season, it can't get worse. And then seemingly every day something happens that makes it worse. We'll talk about some more bad injury news coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, August 13th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' 1-0 loss to the Seattle Mariners on Tuesday night. Talk about an incredible start from Dean Kremer, but the Orioles offense just with an absolute no-show once again. Then we'll talk about the tough injury news we got from Baltimore on Tuesday. Both Zach Eflin and Félix Bautista have been ruled out for the remainder of the season. What it means for the Orioles for these final 6 weeks or so, but more importantly, what does it mean for those guys in this team heading into 2026? And finally, a couple of roster moves to get to, including Daniel Johnson rejoining the Orioles on waivers. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So we start this one with another Orioles loss, their third consecutive L as they fall 1-0 against the Seattle Mariners Tuesday night in Baltimore in game one of a 3-game set. The Orioles shut out with another bad offensive performance and fall to 53-66 on the season. Let's start with what went right for the O's on Tuesday night, and that was Dean Kremer was just fantastic in this game. Arguably his best start of 2025. It was the second longest start of his career. If you can remember back almost 3 years ago, September 23rd of 2022 in Baltimore against the Astros, Dean Kremer threw a complete game shutout that day. That was awesome to watch. But Tuesday, he was not as good, didn't finish off the game, but he goes 8 innings for just the second time in his career. 8 innings of 1-run ball against the Mariners, 5 hits, 6 strikeouts, and 1 walk on 101 pitches thrown by Dean, who now sits at a 4.17 ERA on the season. And he was fantastic. Just the third time in his career he's pitched more than 7 innings. Also had another start against Houston in Houston that same 2022 season, August 27th, 7 2/3 innings of 1-run ball in that one. But this one was a full 8 innings. And it was an incredible splitter from Dean Kremer. He got 10 whiffs on 19 swings against the Seattle hitters on that pitch. Threw it 31% of the time. It was his most used offering on Tuesday night. And he also got a lot of chase on that pitch. 50% of the splitters he threw out of the zone were swung at by Mariners hitters. I mean, if you've got your best pitch and guys are swinging at it outside the zone half the time, you're going to have a good night. And that's exactly what he did. He was fooling everybody. It was mostly lefties, but he was throwing good splitters to right-handed hitters in that Mariners lineup, and they were swinging and missing. Got a Rosareno with it a couple of times. I mean, his velo also, his pitch velocity was pretty much down across the board. It wasn't like, oh, the fastball's down a tick. Like everything that he threw was down a little bit, and it really didn't matter. Like he located both of his fastballs, the 4-seamer and the sinker. He was on the corners with those pitches very, very often in this game. He gave up a run in the first inning. He allowed an RBI single to Josh Naylor, and the Mariners went up 1-0 quickly in the top of the first, and that was the only run scored in this entire game. Dean Kremer locked it down for the next 7 innings scoreless. He didn't get a lot of swing and miss on anything else that he threw. It was 14 whiffs total. 10 of them came on the splitter, but he mixed all 5 of his pitches well. He kept the Mariners hitters guessing. I thought the curveball was good because he only threw it 8 times, but he was able to kind of drop it in for a strike anytime he needed to. Again, the fastballs were all in the strike zone. The splitter was getting chase. It was getting whiff. It had really, really good late deceptive movement. This is the kind of pitcher he's been since May, right? It was, once again, like it seems to be every year, a disastrous April for Dean Kremer, and he's been, in terms of pure innings and performance, he's been the Orioles' best starting pitcher since May 1st. Like, yeah, start for start, Trevor Rogers has been better, but he's only made 10 starts in that stretch, right? Dean Kremer's made almost, not quite double that, but he's been in the rotation for longer, and he's just been really, really consistent for this Orioles team. And, if we have nothing else down the stretch, we have Dean Kremer, and hopefully we have some more outings like this as well. Now, what went wrong for the Orioles is that, if you're going to watch the Orioles games right now, which I don't know if I would recommend. I would certainly recommend watching and listening to the Locked On Orioles podcast after these Orioles games, but it gives you space to not watch the game. And you can just hear from me talk about what happened. You don't have to subject yourself to that for 2+ hours. If you're going to choose to watch the Orioles games, as crazy as this sounds to say, given what has been the Orioles' issue, especially early in this disastrous season, I'd only watch the half innings where the Orioles are pitching right now. You got some good starts from Kramer. You got some interesting relief arms who are getting some outings. When the O's are at the plate, just change the channel. Like, it's rough. I mean, they get shut out on Tuesday night after scoring 8 runs in 3 games against the Athletics. 28th in baseball in team ERA, that A's pitching staff. And they came in and the O's were lucky to win one of the games in that 3-game series. Just shut down the Orioles. Then it's even worse. They get blanked on Tuesday night. Now, listen, George Kirby, the Mariners starter, 10 times better than anyone the A's threw out there this weekend. So a little more acceptable to get shut down by George Kirby. He's had a little bit of a rough season, but he's been great lately. Only 2 extra base hits allowed in his previous 3 starts combined. Kirby, when healthy, is one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. But, you're running out the Ryan Noda, Greg Allen, Dylan Carlson offense right now. It's kind of sad to watch. And maybe if we're lucky, only 2 more games of this, right? August 15th is this Friday. That is the date where if the Orioles call up Dylan Beavers and they're smart, he still maintains rookie eligibility for 2026. Like I talked about the reasons for him not being here on yesterday's episode. So make sure to go back and check that one out if you have not already. So maybe just 2 more games, we have to look at this outfield. And it's funny, like Ryan Noda did get a hit. He singled in the 7th. Dylan Carlson did get a hit. He finally got a hit. Soft infield single in the 3rd off Kirby. Snapped an 0 for 35 stretch for Dylan Carlson, which was the 3rd longest in Orioles history. So at least he's not climbing up the record books right there. Didn't take many good at-bats, just kind of a little dribbler off the bat. And he was able to beat it out at first base. But otherwise, Gunnar had a hustle double. Jackson Holliday had a single. That was really it for the Orioles until the 9th. Like, it was nice to see them rally a little bit in the 9th inning. Holliday and Westberg were retired, and then Gunnar worked a walk. And then Andres Munoz, the usual Mariners shutdown closer, there was a long chat with him and the trainer on the mound. He looked to be dehydrated, got one of those electrolyte packs and drank some water and got back out there and allowed a single to Adley Rutschman. So, Gunnar and Adley, they've been swinging it well. They're doing their part. They get on base. And I mean, Ryan Mountcastle was close to walking this game off. Remember, the Orioles are still the only team remaining in Major League Baseball without a walk-off win in 2025. Mountcastle got an 0-1 hanging slider and roped it down the left field line, just about 5 feet too far to the left, ends up in foul territory. I thought that might be the game-winning hit. And then Mountie ends up grounding out as Munoz locks down the save. So nice to see them rally a little bit. And I believe that was the only inning where they had multiple base runners, was the bottom of the 9th against Andres Munoz. But it's 8 runs in the 4 games since Colton Cowser and Tyler O'Neill went on the injured list on Friday, and they've been putting that outfield out there. It's just rough to watch this offense. I wouldn't recommend watching this team if you want to just check in for the Gunnar and Adley at bats and then check out again. I just would not recommend watching this team try and hit the ball right now. It is rough. And the shout out for Tuesday's loss goes to Rico Garcia, who the right-handed pitcher who was claimed off waivers by the Orioles from the Mets last Tuesday. Finally, a week later, made his 2025 Orioles debut on Tuesday. Kramer was at 101 pitches. He came out. Rico Garcia pitched a scoreless top of the 9th to keep it just a 1-0 Mariners lead. Did allow a 2-out single, but otherwise was able to get out of it. And we know Rico Garcia. He's an old friend. Pitched a handful of games for the 2022 Orioles out of the bullpen. Has kind of been bouncing around the big leagues in AAA since then. Caught on with the Mets this year and was really, really good out of the Mets bullpen. But, they added a lot of players to their pitching staff, including Gregory Soto from the Orioles at the deadline. Ran out of room for Garcia. He is out of options, so they DFA'd him. The O's picked him up, and, there's a little bit of a different slider. He was posting some really good numbers, and hey, it's nice to see him a scoreless inning in his first outing back. Maybe he's a guy who can potentially stick in this bullpen, but certainly a nice first outing. But not much he or Dean Kremer could do watching this Orioles offense struggle in a 1-0 loss to the red-hot Seattle Mariners. But despite it being an annoying shutout loss, it was not nearly the worst Orioles news of Tuesday. The worst news was Injuries. I mean, Zach Eflin and Félix Bautista, they were already on the injured list, and it somehow got worse for both of them. Done for the year. We'll talk about the issues they're having, what it means for the team moving forward. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? No, you called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important, and that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. And your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more, hey, who's handling this? And OpenPhone is offering Locked On Orioles listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonmlb. That's openphone.com/lockedonmlb. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. That's at OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers. So the 1-0 loss to the Mariners on Tuesday was not the Orioles' greatest loss of the day. They got some more. It seems like they can't get any more bad injury news here in this disastrous, cursed 2025 season, but they got more of it on Tuesday before the game. Orioles interim manager Tony Mansolino announcing that both Zach Eflin and Félix Bautista will officially miss the remainder of the 2025 season. Now, both guys were currently on the injured list, so it's not like the O's had to make roster moves around them and put them on the IL. We knew they weren't, coming back in the next week or so. There were a lot of questions surrounding both of them. Now we have unfortunate answers. They are both out for the year. Let's start with Zach Eflin, who has had an injury-riddled 2025 season. The Orioles say he will have season-ending lumbar microdissectomy procedure next week. He will kind of rehab down in his home in Florida. And, we'll obviously talk about his impending free agency. But Eflin's been on the injured list since July 31st with what the Orioles called lower back discomfort. Remember, they thought they could trade him because he had come back from the IL, and then they put him back on the injured list on deadline day. He was also on the injured list with the same injury from June 30th through July 23rd. Came back, made 2 kind of so-so starts, and then went right back on the injured list. And that was after he had missed a month early in the season with a lat strain. It was so many different kind of back area injuries for Eflin. And he was his great normal Eflin self in his first 3 starts of the year. He was the Orioles opening day starter before he made his first IL stint. Then he came back, really struggled, figured out he had an arm angle issue, pitched well in the middle of the year, then started struggling again. Turns out it was the back issue, comes back, goes back on the IL with the back issue. Overall, it does not look like a good season for Zach Eflin. Ends up making 14 starts for the Orioles, throwing 71 1/3 innings and posting a 5.93 ERA in those 14 starts. And that is a guy in Eflin who came over at the trade deadline last year and in 9 starts had a 2.60 ERA for the Orioles down the stretch. He was just a different pitcher, and the injury seemingly had a whole lot to do with that. His 16% strikeout rate, that dropped. I mean, he's still a 4% walk rate. He still wasn't walking guys, but his fastball velo was down. His stuff plus went down from 100 to 93 this year. It was not a good 2025 for Eflin. So what does this mean for the future? In terms of the remainder of the 2025 season for the Orioles, I actually think we were kind of expecting Eflin to return at some point, right? If you remember when Eflin went on the injured list on deadline day, Ken Rosenthal actually reported it and said that he was still kind of active in trade talks because teams thought it wasn't any kind of season-ending injury. It wasn't an arm injury, and they thought he'd be back. So teams were actually still considering dealing for him, even with him going back on the IL. Obviously, something changed there for Eflin. But at this point, it just means, more secure places for the Cade Poviches and Brandon Youngs of the world to be in this rotation for the rest of the year. And the other thing is, whenever Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells return, and even Albert Suarez, who pitched in his first rehab games, two innings in Double-A on Tuesday night, when those guys come back, I guess it makes it a little easier to assimilate them back into the roster or into the rotation. Now, the O's have said that Suarez will not come back as a starter. He'll come back as a multi-inning reliever. TBD on Wells. We know Bradish will come back as a starter, but it just gives you more innings to go around, right? You obviously going to keep Rogers in there. Sugano's pitching really well. Kramer's pitching really well. So the two spots, quote unquote, up for grabs are the Cade Povich and Brandon Young spots at the moment. Zach Eflin coming back would have certainly pushed one of those guys out. So it just means more innings for those two as the O's continue to evaluate them and see what they'll be for this team, rotation, bullpen, whatever it may be moving forward. But in terms of Eflin's future, I mean, at one point when he was pitching well last year and early this season, like he was a candidate to get the qualifying offer. He is an impending free agent. He is set to hit free agency once this season ends. And, you thought he's a guy who could have gotten one of those, 3-year, $60 million contracts in free agency at 31 years old, seemingly, could pitch later into his years because of the way he does it and throws a lot of strikes and doesn't have the overpowering stuff, but mixes his pitch as well. And he's just, with the injury riddled and poor performance when he was out there kind of season he had, I don't think somebody's given him 3 years, $60 million this offseason. Like I was calling for 6 months ago, the Orioles to give Zach Eflin an extension. I think most people were behind me in that. And I don't feel the same way right now, just because you see stuff, you get more information, and it did not look good. However, I think the Orioles could get him back on basically a prove it deal, right? If this back surgery that he has, I'm not going to call myself an expert on what back procedure he's getting, but if it turns out to be something where, he's down for a time and then he can start throwing and he's ready to go at or around spring training of next year and can potentially be ready for opening day, if that's going to be the case with this injury, at this point, kind of the Orioles would know better than any other team, which gives them a little advantage here when they're thinking about this decision. If he's going to be ready for next year, I would absolutely give him a 1-year prove it deal, a 1-year, 10, 12, maybe $15 million contract where, hey, come back at age 32, prove that you're okay. And then either we extend you or another team gives you a multi-year deal in free agency next offseason. That's kind of what Eflin's going to look at. I don't think it was so bad that he's not going to get a major league deal. Some team is going to give him a major league deal, probably a 1-year deal to pitch in their rotation next season. But if Eflin, doesn't want to go to pitch on a prove it deal for the White Sox or the Angels or something, or rather be on a team that has, I think, more plans to compete in 2026 than an organization it seems like he's really loved being in since he came over here at the deadline last year. I think it could work out for both parties. 1 year, $13 million for Zach Eflin. And if you don't get a lot out of him, you don't get a lot out of him. It's not a big investment. And if you do, it's a huge steal and just more innings. Because if we've learned anything this year about the Orioles rotation, you just need as many guys who can throw innings as possible. Zach Eflin, when healthy, is one of those guys. And as long as this back thing isn't just super debilitating for him, I'd be on board with the Orioles bringing him back for 1 year, and it's a lot easier to kind of do that at this point, but we'll see what his free agency looks like. Now, the other big one is Félix Bautista, who is also out for the season with what the Orioles called, quote, a significant shoulder injury. Now, the O's are still waiting for his next appointment, seeing the doctor before kind of fully revealing and talking about the severity and what the next steps are for this injury. Now, again, not a doctor. Haven't seen anyone MRIs or x-rays, but if you're calling a significant shoulder injury, that makes me think there's at least a solid chance he's going to have to get shoulder surgery here. And we already know he's done for the rest of this year. That would certainly eat into 2026 because sometimes for pitchers, shoulder issues can be even worse and keep you out for even longer than elbow issues can. He's already a guy who missed all of last year after getting Tommy John surgery. Now, he was back for opening day this year, and overall, he was still a really good reliever. He still racked up 19 saves. He had a 2.6 ERA in 34 2/3 innings. But, the ERA was up. The FIP was up. The strikeout rate was down from 46 to 35%. The walk rate climbed from 11 to 16%. Like the command was clearly not there. Now, guys hit 144 against him 2 years ago. They only hit 134 against him this year. The stuff overall was still good, but his command was just, and it's not like he was a huge big time command guy, but his command was just not the same. And if you really look at like the overall stuff that he had, it took a fall off. His splitter was not as good. His fastball was not as good. The velocity, right, was way down. I mean, he was throwing 100 back in 2023 and he was, around 96, 97 this year. It was not the same kind of pitcher this season. Still a good pitcher, still a good closer, not the same Félix Bautista pre-elbow surgery. And now you're going to have a guy who at the very least is going to have a shoulder issue he's dealing with, right? He's been on the IL for a couple of weeks since he felt some shoulder pain warming up for a game in Cleveland a couple of weeks ago. If there's shoulder surgery, I mean, you're eating into a lot of 2026. If it's a bad shoulder surgery, he could be out for all of next year. as well. And what does that mean for the Orioles? Well, he's under contract through 2027. So, even if he missed all of next year, he'd come back and still have one more season before he would be due to hit free agency. He's making $1 million this year because when he got that Tommy John back in October of 2023, the Orioles did a 2-year, $2 million deal with Félix. It was kind of a win-win for both sides. The Orioles get him cost controlled for 2 years, and Félix gets a little bit more money than he would make in arbitration because he wasn't going to pitch in 2024 into his first year of arbitration. So that covered $1 million last year while he was rehabbing, and then $1 million this year. I bet the Orioles go to him and potentially, if he does need not season ending, but like big shoulder surgery that eats into next season, I bet they go to him again and say, hey, Félix, what about, 2 years, $5 million, right? We'll pay you 2.5 for next year. We'll pay you 2.5 or, we'll pay you 3.5 or something like that for 2027 when you think you can come back, and maybe he takes that as well. I mean, who knows what this is going to mean for Félix Bautista. Again, with it already never really fully coming back from the elbow surgery. I want to wait and see because we don't know if surgery is going to be the answer here. The O's are going to tell us more in about a week when he sees the surgeon or the doctor or whomever again. But it's not good news. It's bad news. It's just about how bad the news is, and we'll find that out soon. But if he is going to miss a chunk, if not all of next season, which is all on the table at this point, we don't know yet, but it's possible. This team is going to need a true closer. And, I've been talking about the Orioles' plans for 2026, and we've talked about how the bullpen's going to look very different, right? We've chatted about how those kind of 3 carryovers would be Bautista, Yennier Cano, and Keegan Aiken, and then you'd have 5 spots to fill. And I've talked about how, 2 or 3 of these guys who are kind of auditioning in the bullpen right now could stick, maybe 2 free agent signings, maybe a guy like Tyler Wells or Chase McDermott, they get moved into the bullpen for next year. And the easiest part of the team to build up quickly is a bullpen. You can find guys out of nowhere. Mike Elias and the Orioles have been doing it for years. I'm confident they can do it again. But that was all assuming that even with the shoulder issue now, that Félix would be good for 2026. You'd have maybe not your top closer in the game like he was 2 years ago, but a really good closer at the back end where you could find these good arms and piece it together and know that you had Félix in the ninth, which makes you feel a whole lot better about your bullpen. If that's no longer the case, you look at this bullpen a lot differently, right? And you could say, Connor, I was already looking at it a lot differently because Baker and Kittredge were traded and there's not as many veterans. But Bautista is different. The closer being gone is different. We saw that with the Craig Kimbrell experience in 2024. Even though he was great in the first half, he was a disaster down the stretch, and the O's used a bunch of different options. They can find guys, right? Good setup guys. They can fill in the ninth inning if it's going to be just Félix missing the first part of the season, but you don't know what he'd be when he comes back if this is a really serious shoulder thing. So you probably got to either make some sort of trade to go get a high leverage back end guy that's available this offseason. Maybe the Padres now do want to unload Robert Suarez, got a pretty cheap club option for next year, or you go into free agency and one of these proven closers, a Kenley Jansen, a Ryan Helsley, a Devin Williams, a Luke Weaver, just kind of a sampling of the back-end bullpen guys who will be available this offseason. And I've always talked about how Mike Elias, kind of unwilling to pay long-term for relievers, and that's not a lot of teams like to do that. But hey, the Orioles offered Jeff Hoffman a 3-year, $40 million contract this offseason, which ended up going down the hole because of some injury concerns with him. But they are clearly willing to give out multiple years and a good amount of money to elite relief pitchers. Now, some of that is that I think the Orioles were planning to turn Hoffman, have him be a reliever this year, and then turn him into a starter for the final 2 years of the contract, similar to what like the Mets did with Clay Holmes this season. And the O's were in on Holmes as well. So that's a little bit different. You pay a little bit more money for a guy you think is going to be a starter eventually. But I could see them being in the Devin Williams market. I could see them being in the Luke Weaver market, to get one of these guys to feel a little bit better about the ninth inning. But it's not the bullpen, the closer is not the most important thing on a team. Certainly is not. Their relievers are volatile even when they don't get hurt. They go up and down. But it is another concerning part of this team heading into next year, and another just cursed part of this team this year. Well, maybe some better news, ? Depending on how you look at it. That's how we'll finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That is where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And if you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time's zone deals pick out the best seats in the section just for you. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So to finish off today's show, wanted to talk about the roster moves that the Orioles made on Tuesday, and an old friend is back. It's not just Rico Garcia, who made his 2025 Orioles debut in Tuesday's game after being with the Orioles previously. It was Daniel Johnson as well, the 30-year-old left-handed hitting outfielder who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the San Francisco Giants earlier this week and then activated him to the roster on Tuesday. He came in as a pinch runner for Ryan Noda in the 8th, played center field in the 9th, but did not get a plate appearance in his first game back with the O's. Now, Johnson, speedy, good bat speed, hits the ball hard, can play center, plays all three outfield positions really well, left-handed hitter, was with the Giants this year on a minor league deal, was playing really well in AAA, 111 WRC plus, low strikeout rate, 278 average, had a 48% hard hit rate and a 115 mile per hour max exit velocity, best numbers of his career. And he was called up by the Giants, spent most of June in the big leagues, didn't play a lot, was more of a pinch hitter, defensive replacement, pinch runner, 14 games, went 5 for 29 with a home run and 8 strikeouts, then was sent back to AAA in July and has been hitting well in AAA since then, was still on the 40-man roster, but the Giants made some roster moves recently and DFA Johnson, as that was when the Orioles put in a claim on him. Now, a former Nats 5th-round pick in 2016 was traded to Cleveland in November of 2018, was a pretty well-rated prospect, had all the tools, played in the futures game back in the day, and he did debut with Cleveland in the big leagues for 5 games in 2020, played in 30 games with them in 2021, but then did not come back into the big leagues until 2024, and that was with the Orioles. The O's signed him to a minor league deal in the offseason before the 2024 campaign. He was pretty solid in Norfolk, hit 21 home runs for the Tides, and the Orioles called him up for a few days in September, only got 1 plate appearance in that game, and then was sent back down to AAA and eventually DFA'd, but liked what he showed in AAA. Always had the tools, but really just never put it all together. He does still have minor league options left for this season, so the O's at some point, if they just want to send him to AAA and keep him in the org when they get some guys back, Cowser, O'Neill, hopefully Beavers here, that is possible. But he is much better than someone like Jordan Adams. And Jordan Adams is who was optioned back to AAA Norfolk to make room on the roster for Johnson on Tuesday. And while Johnson wasn't in the starting lineup, I think he's probably easily better than Greg Allen. So if you want to just start playing him in center field over Greg Allen for the time being, probably do that. Probably better than Dylan Carlson, the way Carlson's swinging the bat right now. Has more experience than someone like Jeremiah Jackson. And I think the team is slightly more watchable if Daniel Johnson's in center field over Greg Allen and Dylan Carlson right now, at least until Colton Cowser comes back or Dylan Beavers gets here or whatever it may be. Slightly more watchable is a good thing. I like Daniel Johnson as a player. Guys seem to really like him in that clubhouse. So yeah, let's give him some ABs for the next week and see what happens. Let me tell you one thing. It can't be worse than the offense the Orioles are sending out there right now. Then they made a couple of other moves with Daniel Johnson as well. Right-handed pitcher Jose Espada was actually selected to the 40-man roster and then was optioned to AAA Norfolk. So a little confusing here, but Espada, the Orioles signed, he's a 28-year-old right-handed reliever. Orioles signed him to a minor league deal late in July. He's bounced around AAA for a few years, debuted with the Padres a couple of years ago, but didn't really stick in their bullpen. Now you're asking, Connor, why would they, he was not on the 40-man. Why would they put him on the 40-man and then just send him right back to AAA? He was already pitching in Norfolk. Why would you make that move and take a 40-man spot if you're not going to call him up? Well, clearly what that means is Jose Espada had an opt-out written into the minor league contract he signed with the Orioles last month. Presumably that opt-out triggered on Monday. And what an opt-out in the contract means is I'm going to put this into my contract where if I'm not in the big leagues with you by a certain date, it was probably August 11th, you either have to add me to the 40-man roster, which allows him to make more money when he's on the 40-man, even if he's not in the big leagues, or you basically have to release me. And so the Orioles must have liked enough of what they've seen from Espada. They didn't want to release him just yet, so they put him on the 40-man, but because he still has minor league options, they didn't have to put him on the big league roster. They just basically keep him in AAA, but he's now taking up a 40-man roster spot. Since Espada has joined the Tides, 5 appearances out of the bullpen, 6 innings, 4 hits, 4 runs, 8 Ks, 2 walks, and 2 homers. But his last outing Saturday in Norfolk was unbelievable. 6 up, 6 down with 5 strikeouts in that one. It's a slider at 85. His velo is up. The Orioles having him throw it more. Got 5 whiffs on that pitch on Saturday. 4-seam fastball 95 to 97. His velo is up 2 ticks since joining the Orioles. He's got 19 inches of induced vertical brace. Got that good riding action. And he's got a new splitter the O's are having him throw. It's got more movement than his previous splitters and changeups. And the fact that, they gave him a 40-man spot and kept him around, even though they optioned him right back to AAA, tells me that there's a very good chance, especially with the state of the current Orioles bullpen and all the auditions guys are getting, there's a really good shot we see Jose Espada pitch in the big leagues for the Orioles at some point this season. But because they had already claimed Johnson and they had to add Espada, they were out of 40-man roster spots. So someone had to lose one, and 27-year-old right-handed pitcher Houston Roth was DFA'd to make room for Espada. Roth, the former 29th round pick by the Orioles out of Ole Miss in 2019, Mike Elias' first draft, grinded through injuries and ups and downs all the way through the minor league system to finally have some success in AAA Norfolk this year. And a couple weeks ago, the Orioles finally selected him to the 40-man roster, called him up to the big leagues in the bullpen. He was here for, I think, 4 games, but unfortunately, the O's never called his name from the bullpen, and he optioned him back down to AAA a few days later. Now he hits waivers. Hopefully he clears waivers, accepts his outright assign, or hopefully he clears waivers and stays with the O's and they give him another chance to come back up and actually pitch in a big league game later this year. Right here, at this point, he is a phantom major leaguer, and hopefully he can kind of finish the dream and get into a game at some point this year. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, and subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen, Apple, Spotify, wherever it may be. It all helps out the show. Orioles back in action tonight. Maybe they'll score a run, right? I have a feeling this could be another 1-0 loss because Trevor Rogers is on the bump for the Orioles, a 1.44 ERA in 10 starts. And Logan Gilbert's on the bump for the Mariners, a 3.35 ERA in 16 starts. He's been a little shaky lately, but overall awesome this season. If the O's lost this one 1-0 again, I wouldn't be too surprised. It's 6:35 on Masson as the O's look to even the series. And I'll be back with you tomorrow recapping everything you need to know between Game 2 between the O's and the Mariners. We'll talk about some more Orioles roster news, some more minor league releases, some exciting minor league news from the week, all that and more coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.